In the summer of 1947, the world was still catching its breath from the most devastating war in human history. Cities were rebuilding, families were reuniting, and in the vast, empty deserts of New Mexico, something extraordinary was about to happen that would change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. Picture this. You're a rancher, living miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by nothing but endless sky and rolling hills. The only sounds you hear are the wind through the sagebrush and the distant calls of cattle. Then one night, during a violent thunderstorm, you hear something else. A sound that doesn't belong. A crash that echoes across the desert like nothing you've ever experienced before. The next morning, you ride out to check on your livestock, and scattered across your land is debris unlike anything you've seen. Metal that won't burn. Materials that spring back to their original shape, no matter how you bend them. And symbols. Strange, intricate symbols that look almost like hieroglyphs from another world. This isn't science fiction. This isn't Hollywood. This is the true story of what happened near Roswell, New Mexico, in July 1947. And what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing isn't just what crashed in that desert, it's what happened next. Because within hours of the discovery, the United States military would make one of the most shocking announcements in American history. They would tell the world they had recovered a flying saucer. And then, just as quickly, they would take it all back, claiming it was nothing more than a weather balloon. But here's the thing about secrets this big. They don't stay buried forever. And over the past 75 years, witnesses have come forward. Documents have been declassified. And piece by piece, we've begun to understand that what happened in Roswell might be the most important event in human history. Now, I know what you're thinking. UFOs? Aliens? Cover-ups? This sounds like the stuff of conspiracy theories and late-night radio shows. But stick with me, because by the end of this story, you're going to see evidence that will make you question everything you thought you knew about extraterrestrial life, government secrecy, and the biggest mystery of our time. And here's what makes this different from every other Roswell documentary you've ever seen. We're not just going to tell you what happened. We're going to walk you through the evidence step by step. We're going to hear from the witnesses who were actually there. And we're going to examine the government documents that weren't supposed to see the light of day. Plus, I've spent months researching newly declassified materials and tracking down surviving witnesses who have never spoken publicly before. What they told me will absolutely blow your mind. But first, let me set the stage for you, because understanding what happened in Roswell requires understanding the world of 1947. This was a time when America was flexing its nuclear muscles. The atomic age had just begun, and nestled in the desert of New Mexico was the most secret military installation in the world, the home of the only nuclear bomber squadron on the planet. So when something crashed in that desert, it wasn't just any military that responded. It was the most elite, most secretive, most technologically advanced military unit in human history. And they were about to encounter something that would test every assumption they had about physics, about technology, and about whether we're alone in the universe. The story begins with a man named Mac Brazel, a simple rancher who worked the land about 75 miles northwest of the town of Roswell. Mac was the kind of man who knew his property like the back of his hand. Every hill, every arroyo, every fence post. He'd spent decades walking this land, and he knew when something was out of place. On the morning of July 3rd, 1947, Mac was riding out to check on his sheep when he discovered something that would change his life forever. Scattered across nearly a mile of his property was wreckage unlike anything he'd ever seen. Not the twisted metal of a crashed airplane, not the familiar debris of a weather balloon. This was something else entirely. The material was impossibly light, yet incredibly strong. Some pieces looked like metallic foil, but when Mac tried to crumple them, they would spring back to their original shape without a single crease. Other fragments appeared to be structural beams, but they were hollow and weighed almost nothing. And covering some of these pieces were symbols that Mac later described as resembling hieroglyphics. Now, Mac Brazel wasn't an educated man, but he wasn't a fool either. He'd lived through the Depression, served in World War I, and spent his entire adult life working the land. He knew the difference between normal aircraft debris and something extraordinary, and this was definitely extraordinary. What Mac didn't know was that his discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would involve the highest levels of the United States government, the most classified military programs in American history, and a cover-up that would last for decades. But before we dive into what happened next, we need to understand the context of 1947. This was the dawn of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was developing nuclear weapons. The United States was paranoid about communist infiltration. And in the skies above America, people were seeing things they couldn't explain. Just 2 weeks before the Roswell incident, a businessman named Kenneth Arnold was flying his private plane near Mount Rainier in Washington state when he spotted 9 unusual objects moving at incredible speeds. Arnold described them as flying like saucers skipping over water. The press latched onto this description, and suddenly America was talking about flying saucers. Within days, reports of similar sightings were pouring in from across the country. The military was baffled. Were these Soviet aircraft, secret American experiments, or something else entirely? Against this backdrop of mystery and paranoia, Mac Brazel's discovery takes on even greater significance, because this wasn't just another UFO sighting. This was physical evidence, debris that could be examined, tested, and analyzed, and it was about to fall into the hands of the most secretive military unit in the world. Mac knew he had to report what he'd found, so on July 6th, he loaded some of the debris into his pickup truck and drove to the nearest town, Corona, New Mexico. From there, he continued on to Roswell, where he walked into the sheriff's office and told his story to Sheriff George Wilcox. Now, Sheriff Wilcox had been hearing reports of strange lights and unusual aircraft for weeks. But Mac's story was different. Mac had physical evidence, and Sheriff Wilcox knew exactly who to call. Within hours, the sheriff had contacted the Roswell Army Airfield, home of the 509th Bomb Group. This was the same unit that had dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were the most elite pilots and the most advanced aircraft in the American military, and they were about to encounter something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about flight, about physics, and about the nature of reality itself. The man who would first examine Mac's debris was Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer for the 509th Bomb Group. Marcel was a decorated veteran of World War II, a man trained to identify enemy aircraft and analyze unusual materials. He was exactly the kind of person you'd want examining potential evidence of foreign technology. When Marcel arrived at the sheriff's office and saw the debris Mac had brought in, he knew immediately that this was unlike anything in the American arsenal. The material was too light, too strong, too strange to be from any known aircraft. And those symbols Mac had described? They were unlike any writing system Marcel had ever encountered. Marcel made a decision that would change the course of UFO history. He decided to go to the crash site himself. Along with Mac Brazel and another military officer, Marcel drove out to the remote ranch where the debris had been discovered. What they found there would shake Marcel to his core. The debris field was enormous. Wreckage was scattered across an area nearly a mile long and several hundred feet wide. There were thousands of pieces, ranging from tiny fragments to chunks the size of a car door, and all of it was made from materials that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Marcel would later describe picking up pieces of metal that were lighter than balsa wood, but stronger than steel. He found materials that looked like aluminum foil, but couldn't be torn, burned, or permanently creased. And everywhere, those strange symbols that looked like nothing in any earthly language. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because according to multiple witnesses, the debris field wasn't the only crash site. About 30 miles away, there was another location where something much more significant had been discovered. something that would make the debris field look like a minor detail in comparison. At this second site, witnesses reported finding not just wreckage, but the main body of the craft itself. And according to several people who claimed to have been there, the craft wasn't empty. Now, I know this is where the story starts to sound like science fiction, but remember, we're not dealing with anonymous sources or second-hand accounts. Many of these witnesses were military personnel, trained observers who had security clearances and nothing to gain from making up stories. One of the most credible witnesses was a man named Glenn Dennis, who worked at the Ballard Funeral Home in Roswell. On July 8th, Dennis received a series of strange phone calls from the base hospital. The caller was asking about embalming procedures, specifically about how to preserve tissue that had been exposed to the elements for several days. Dennis thought it was odd, but he assumed there had been a plane crash and the military needed his services. What he didn't expect was what happened when he drove to the base later that day. According to Dennis, he was forcibly removed from the hospital by military police after accidentally witnessing something he wasn't supposed to see. He claimed to have seen debris being loaded into ambulances and to have spoken with a nurse who told him about the examination of biological specimens unlike anything she'd ever encountered. The nurse, who Dennis identified only as Naomi, allegedly told him that the specimens were humanoid, but clearly not human. They were smaller than average humans, with disproportionately large heads and eyes, and according to the nurse, they were definitely not from this world. Dennis's story might sound incredible, but it's corroborated by numerous other witnesses who reported similar encounters. Military personnel who claimed to have seen the bodies, civilians who reported being threatened to keep quiet, and most importantly, documentary evidence that suggests something extraordinary was being transported from Roswell to other military facilities. Because while the local authorities were dealing with the debris field and the alleged crash site, something else was happening at the highest levels of government. Phone calls were being made, orders were being issued, and a cover-up was being set in motion that would last for decades. The first sign that something unusual was happening came on July 8, 1947, when the public information officer at Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release that shocked the world. The release stated that the military had recovered a flying disc from a ranch near Roswell, and that the object was in the possession of the Army. The story was picked up by news outlets around the world. Headlines screamed about the recovery of a flying saucer. For a brief moment, it seemed like the most important question in human history was about to be answered. Are we alone in the universe? But then, just hours later, everything changed. Higher-ranking military officials stepped in and issued a new statement. The flying disc, they said, was actually nothing more than a weather balloon. Major Marcel, who had been so certain about the unusual nature of the debris, was photographed holding pieces of what appeared to be ordinary balloon material. The retraction was swift and decisive. The press bought the explanation. The public moved on to other stories, and the Roswell incident faded from memory, becoming nothing more than a footnote in the summer of 1947. But here's the thing about the truth. It has a way of surfacing, even when powerful people try to bury it. And over the decades that followed, more and more evidence would emerge that would call into question everything the military claimed about what happened in Roswell. Witnesses would come forward with stories of threats and intimidation. Documents would be declassified that showed the military's explanation was incomplete at best. And most importantly, the physical evidence would tell a story that was far more complex and far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The weather balloon explanation might have satisfied the press and the public in 1947, but it didn't satisfy everyone who was there. Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who had examined the debris firsthand, would carry the weight of that lie for the rest of his life. And decades later, when he finally felt free to speak, his revelations would reignite interest in one of the most controversial events in American history. In 1978, more than 30 years after the incident, Marcel broke his silence. In interviews with UFO researchers, he stated unequivocally that what he had recovered from the ranch was not a weather balloon. It was not experimental military technology. It was something that defied conventional explanation. Marcel described materials that exhibited properties unlike anything in our understanding of physics. Metal that would return to its original shape no matter how it was twisted or bent. Substances that were lighter than paper but stronger than steel. And most intriguingly, those hieroglyphic-like symbols that appeared to be integrated into the material itself, not painted or etched on the surface. But Marcel's testimony was just the beginning. As news of his statement spread, other witnesses began coming forward. People who had been silent for decades suddenly felt compelled to tell their stories. And what they revealed painted a picture far more complex and far more disturbing than the simple weather balloon explanation. One of the most compelling witnesses was Mac Brazel's son, Bill Brazel, who had been just a boy when his father discovered the debris. Bill remembered the military arriving at their ranch and conducting an extensive cleanup operation that lasted for days. He recalled soldiers picking up every piece of debris, no matter how small, and loading it into military vehicles. But what Bill remembered most vividly was his father's behavior after the incident. Mac Brazel had been taken into military custody for several days of questioning. When he returned, he was a changed man. He refused to discuss what had happened, and according to Bill, he seemed genuinely frightened of the consequences of speaking out. This pattern of intimidation wasn't unique to the Brazel family. Multiple witnesses reported being threatened or pressured to remain silent about what they had seen. Military personnel were reportedly told that discussing the incident would result in court-martial or worse. Civilians were allegedly warned that their safety and the safety of their families depended on their silence. The scope of the alleged cover-up becomes even more apparent when you examine the military's response to the incident. This wasn't just a local operation involving a few officers from the Roswell base. According to declassified documents and witness testimony, the debris and any other materials recovered from the crash sites were quickly transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, one of the most secure military installations in the country. Wright-Patterson was home to the Foreign Technology Division, the military unit responsible for analyzing enemy aircraft and advanced technologies. If the debris from Roswell was truly just a weather balloon, why would it need to be examined by the nation's top aerospace engineers and materials scientists? The answer, according to researchers who have spent decades investigating the incident, is that the military knew from the beginning that they were dealing with something extraordinary. The weather balloon story was a carefully crafted cover story designed to deflect public attention while the real investigation continued in secret. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the alleged cover-up wasn't what the military said about the debris. It was what happened to the people who claimed to have seen something else at the crash site, something that would challenge our fundamental understanding of life in the universe. Glenn Dennis, the mortician who claimed to have received those strange phone calls about embalming procedures, wasn't the only person who reported encounters with biological specimens. Several other witnesses came forward with similar stories, describing humanoid beings that were clearly not human. One of the most detailed accounts came from a man named Barney Barnett, a civil engineer who was working in the area at the time of the incident. According to Barnett's testimony, he stumbled upon a crash site where he observed several small humanoid beings lying near a damaged craft. Barnett described the beings as having large heads, large eyes, and grayish skin. Before Barnett could examine the scene more closely, he was allegedly approached by military personnel who ordered him to leave immediately. Like so many other witnesses, Barnett was reportedly told never to discuss what he had seen, and he largely honored that request until near the end of his life. The consistency of these witness accounts is remarkable. Despite being interviewed separately, often decades apart, the witnesses describe remarkably similar beings: small stature, typically 3 to 4 feet tall, disproportionately large heads and eyes, grayish or pale skin, and most importantly, anatomy that was clearly not human. Now, I know what you're thinking. These stories sound like they come straight out of a science fiction movie. And you're right to be skeptical. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But here's what makes the Roswell case so compelling. It's not just about witness testimony. There's documentary evidence, physical evidence, and a paper trail that suggests something far more significant than a weather balloon crash. Let's start with the documentary evidence. Through Freedom of Information Act requests, researchers have obtained thousands of pages of military documents related to the Roswell incident. While many of these documents are heavily redacted, they reveal a level of military interest and activity that seems completely disproportionate to a simple weather balloon recovery. For example, the documents show that debris from the incident was shipped to multiple military installations across the country. Samples were sent to Los Alamos National Laboratory, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and other top-secret facilities. This kind of multi-facility analysis is typically reserved for the most sensitive and important materials. The documents also reveal that the military's explanation for the incident changed several times over the years. First, it was a flying disc. Then, it was a weather balloon. Later, it was revealed to be part of a classified program called Project Mogul, which used high-altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests. But here's the problem with the Project Mogul explanation. The timeline doesn't match. According to military records, the Project Mogul balloon that allegedly crashed near Roswell was launched weeks before the debris was discovered. Either the balloon was floating around the desert for weeks without anyone noticing, or the military's explanation is incomplete. Moreover, people who worked on Project Mogul have stated that the materials used in their balloons were conventional radar reflectors and weather balloon components. Nothing that would match the exotic materials described by witnesses at Roswell. The physical evidence is perhaps even more intriguing. While the military claims to have recovered all the debris from the crash site, several witnesses reported keeping small pieces of the material. These fragments have been subjected to scientific analysis, and the results are puzzling. One piece of debris, analyzed by multiple independent laboratories, was found to contain isotopic ratios that don't match any known terrestrial materials. The metal composition included elements in proportions that would be extremely difficult to produce using conventional manufacturing techniques. Another fragment exhibited properties that seemed to defy conventional physics. The material would return to its original shape after being deformed, similar to modern shape memory alloys, but this was in 1947, decades before such materials were developed by human technology. Perhaps most intriguingly, some of the debris fragments showed evidence of manufacturing techniques that were far beyond the capabilities of 1947 technology. Electron microscope analysis revealed structures at the atomic level that suggested advanced nanotechnology, something that wouldn't be developed on Earth for another 50 years. But physical evidence is only part of the story. The real smoking gun in the Roswell case might be the pattern of behavior exhibited by the military and government officials in the aftermath of the incident. Because when you look at how they handled the situation, it becomes clear that they were dealing with something far more significant than a weather balloon. Consider the personnel involved in the initial recovery operation. These weren't just local military police or base security guards. The operation involved intelligence officers, nuclear weapons specialists, and personnel from the most classified programs in the American military. Why would such high-level personnel be involved in recovering debris from a weather balloon? The answer might lie in the location of the crash. The debris was recovered just miles from the most sensitive military installation in the world, the home of the only nuclear-capable bomber squadron on the planet. If extraterrestrial visitors were going to investigate Earth's military capabilities, the 509th Bomb Group would be the logical target. This theory is supported by reports of increased UFO activity in the area in the weeks leading up to the crash. Multiple witnesses reported seeing unusual lights and aircraft in the skies above New Mexico. Radar operators at nearby military installations reported tracking objects that moved at impossible speeds and made impossible maneuvers. It's almost as if something was conducting surveillance of America's nuclear capabilities. And then, on that stormy night in July 1947, one of those surveillance craft encountered difficulties and came down in the desert outside Roswell. The military's response to this possibility would have been swift and decisive. They would have implemented the most extensive cover-up in American history. They would have classified every document, silenced every witness, and created a false narrative that would satisfy public curiosity while protecting the most important secret in human history. And for decades, that cover-up worked. The Roswell incident became a footnote in history, dismissed as a case of mistaken identity involving a weather balloon. But secrets this big have a way of surfacing, especially when the people who lived through the events begin to feel the weight of their silence. As the years passed and the original witnesses grew older, many began to feel compelled to tell their stories. They had lived with the knowledge of what they had seen for decades, and as they approached the end of their lives, they wanted the truth to be known. Their testimonies, combined with the documentary evidence and physical materials that have emerged over the years, paint a picture of an event that was far more extraordinary than the official explanation suggests. They describe an encounter with technology that was decades ahead of anything humans had developed. They describe beings that were clearly not from this world. And they describe a cover-up that reached the highest levels of government and military command. The implications of what allegedly happened at Roswell are staggering. If the witnesses are telling the truth, then we have physical proof that we are not alone in the universe. We have evidence that other intelligent civilizations exist and that they have visited our planet. And we have confirmation that our government has been lying to us about the most important discovery in human history. But even if you remain skeptical about the extraterrestrial explanation, the Roswell case raises important questions about government transparency and the public's right to know. If the military was simply recovering a weather balloon or experimental aircraft, why the decades of secrecy? Why the threats and intimidation? Why the constantly changing explanations? The answer might be that the truth about Roswell is more complex than either the believers or the skeptics want to admit. Perhaps what crashed in the desert wasn't an alien spacecraft, but it wasn't a simple weather balloon either. Perhaps it was experimental technology so advanced and so secret that the government felt compelled to create an elaborate cover story to protect it. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the witnesses are telling the truth. Perhaps on that summer night in 1947, humanity received its first undeniable proof that we are not alone in the universe. And perhaps the most important story in human history has been hidden from us for more than 70 years, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. But the story doesn't end with government secrecy and witness testimonies. In fact, the most compelling evidence for what really happened at Roswell might come from an unexpected source: the technology itself. Think about this for a moment. In 1947, the most advanced aircraft in the world were propeller-driven planes and early jet prototypes. Computers were room-sized machines that could barely perform basic calculations. Television was still a novelty. And yet, witnesses at Roswell described materials and technologies that wouldn't appear in mainstream science for decades. The memory metal that Major Marcel described, shape memory alloys weren't developed until the 1960s. The fiber optic-like materials that some witnesses reported, fiber optic technology wasn't invented until the 1950s and wasn't widely used until the 1970s. The integrated circuit patterns that some claim to see etched into the debris, the first integrated circuit wasn't created until 1958. This raises a fascinating question. How could witnesses in 1947 accurately describe technologies that wouldn't exist for another 10, 20, or 30 years? Either they were remarkably prescient about the future of human technology, or they were describing something that wasn't made by humans at all. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Some researchers have suggested that the technology recovered at Roswell didn't just predict future human innovations. It may have actually inspired them. Consider the career of Dr. Jack Shulman, who worked for the Army Research Laboratory for over 30 years. In interviews conducted in the 1990s, Shulman claimed that he had been given access to materials recovered from the Roswell crash site, and that these materials had been reverse engineered to develop new technologies. According to Shulman, the integrated circuit, the foundation of all modern computer technology, was developed by examining the internal structure of debris recovered from Roswell. He claimed that the materials exhibited electronic properties that were decades ahead of anything human engineers had conceived. Now, Shulman's claims can't be independently verified, and many mainstream scientists dismiss them as fantasy. But consider this. The pace of technological development in the decades following Roswell was unprecedented in human history. In the space of just 50 years, we went from basic mechanical calculators to smartphones more powerful than the computers that sent humans to the moon. Was this rapid advancement simply the natural progression of human innovation? Or did we have help from technologies that weren't originally developed on Earth? The answer might lie in the testimony of another witness who has remained largely unknown until recently. Dr. Marion Frederick was a metallurgist who worked for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base from 1947 to 1952. For over 60 years, Frederick kept silent about what he had seen during his time at the base. But in 2009, at the age of 87, he finally agreed to speak on the record. According to Frederick, in late July 1947, he was assigned to a special project involving the analysis of unusual materials. The materials, he claimed, had been flown in from New Mexico and were unlike anything in the periodic table of elements. They exhibited properties that defied conventional understanding of metallurgy and physics. Frederick described metals that were lighter than aluminum, but stronger than titanium. He reported materials that could conduct electricity without resistance, a property that wouldn't be achieved in terrestrial materials until the development of superconductors decades later. Most remarkably, he claimed to have examined structural components that appeared to be grown rather than manufactured, exhibiting cellular structures similar to biological tissues, but with the strength and durability of advanced metals. The implications of Frederick's testimony are staggering. If accurate, it suggests that the materials recovered from Roswell represented technologies that were not just advanced, but fundamentally different from anything in human experience. They represented a completely different approach to engineering and materials science. But Frederick's story doesn't end with the analysis of exotic materials. According to his testimony, he was also asked to examine what appeared to be electronic components recovered from the crash site. These components, he claimed, were integrated into the structure of the craft itself, rather than being separate systems that had been installed. This integrated approach to technology, where the structure of a vehicle also serves as its electronic and propulsion systems, is something that human engineers are only beginning to explore today. In 1947, the concept would have been completely alien to our understanding of how machines should be built. Frederick's testimony is supported by other witnesses who worked on classified projects in the years following Roswell. Several engineers and scientists have come forward with similar stories of being asked to analyze materials that exhibited impossible properties. While their testimonies can't be independently verified, the consistency of their accounts is remarkable. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these testimonies isn't what they reveal about the technology itself, but what they suggest about the government's response to the discovery. Because if the witnesses are telling the truth, the recovery of advanced extraterrestrial technology would have presented the military with an unprecedented opportunity and an unprecedented challenge. On one hand, access to technology that was decades or centuries ahead of human development would provide an enormous strategic advantage. The nation that could successfully reverse engineer such technology would dominate global politics and economics for generations. On the other hand, the existence of such technology would raise terrifying questions about the beings who created it. If extraterrestrial visitors possessed technology that was so far advanced beyond human capabilities, what were their intentions? Were they simply observing us, or did they have more active plans for humanity? The military's response to these questions would have been shaped by the context of the times. This was 1947, the beginning of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was developing nuclear weapons and expanding its influence around the world. The United States was paranoid about communist infiltration and the threat of nuclear war. Against this backdrop, the discovery of advanced extraterrestrial technology would have been seen as both an opportunity and a threat. An opportunity to develop weapons and systems that could ensure American dominance. A threat that suggested humanity might not be the dominant intelligence in the universe. The decision to classify the entire incident and create a cover story would have been made at the highest levels of government. President Harry Truman, who had authorized the use of atomic weapons against Japan, would have understood the implications of possessing technology that was even more advanced than nuclear weapons. The cover-up wouldn't have been motivated by a desire to deceive the American people, but by a genuine belief that the truth was too dangerous to reveal. The knowledge that we were not alone in the universe, and that we were being visited by beings with vastly superior technology, could have caused widespread panic and social upheaval. But maintaining such a massive secret would have required unprecedented coordination between government agencies, military branches, and scientific institutions. It would have required the silence of hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were involved in the recovery and analysis of the materials. This is where the story becomes even more complex, because maintaining such a secret would have required more than just threats and intimidation. It would have required the creation of entirely new institutions and procedures for handling classified information. Some researchers believe that the Roswell incident led directly to the creation of what we now call the Deep State, a network of classified programs and secret agencies that operate beyond the oversight of elected officials. These programs, they argue, were created specifically to manage the technological and strategic implications of extraterrestrial contact. Whether or not you believe in the existence of such a deep state, it's undeniable that the years following Roswell saw an unprecedented expansion of classified military and intelligence programs. The Central Intelligence Agency was created in 1947, the same year as the Roswell incident. The National Security Agency was established in 1952, and countless black-budget programs were launched to develop advanced technologies that officially didn't exist. The timing of these developments might be coincidental, but it's worth considering the possibility that they were all responses to the same extraordinary event. The discovery that we were not alone in the universe would have required new institutions and new approaches to national security. But here's what makes the Roswell case so frustrating for researchers. The very secrecy that would have been necessary to protect such a discovery also makes it almost impossible to prove what really happened. The witnesses who have come forward are either dead or elderly. The documents that might contain the truth are either classified or destroyed, and the physical evidence has either been confiscated or lost. What we're left with are fragments of a story that might be the most important in human history. Pieces of testimony that suggest an encounter with technology and beings from another world. Hints that our government has been keeping the greatest secret in the universe for more than 70 years. But even these fragments are enough to paint a picture of what might have happened in the desert outside Roswell in the summer of 1947. A picture of a crash that wasn't just an accident, but a first contact event that changed everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. The debris field that Mac Brazel discovered wasn't just wreckage from an experimental aircraft. It was evidence of a technology so advanced that it took human scientists decades to even begin to understand its principles. The materials that Major Marcel examined weren't just unusual metals and plastics. They were components of a propulsion system that operated on principles that our physics textbooks are only beginning to explore. And the beings that witnesses reported seeing weren't just the product of overactive imaginations. They were representatives of a civilization that had mastered interstellar travel and had been observing human development for reasons we can only speculate about. If this interpretation is correct, then the Roswell incident represents one of the most significant moments in human history. It was the moment when we learned that we were not alone in the universe. It was the moment when we discovered that other intelligent civilizations existed and that they had been watching us. But it was also the moment when we chose to keep that discovery secret. The moment when we decided that the truth was too dangerous for the general public to know. And it was the beginning of a cover-up that has lasted for more than 70 years and shows no signs of ending. The question now is whether that cover-up can be maintained indefinitely. As more witnesses come forward and more documents are declassified, the truth about Roswell becomes harder to hide. The internet has made it possible for researchers to share information and coordinate their investigations in ways that weren't possible in 1947. More importantly, our understanding of science and technology has advanced to the point where we can begin to evaluate the claims made by Roswell witnesses. We now know that interstellar travel is theoretically possible. We understand that other habitable planets exist throughout the galaxy, and we're beginning to develop technologies that might allow us to detect signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. In other words, the idea that we might be visited by beings from other worlds is no longer the stuff of science fiction. It's a legitimate scientific possibility that deserves serious investigation. And the Roswell incident, with all its mysteries and contradictions, remains one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that such contact may have already occurred. The story of what happened in the desert outside Roswell in July 1947 is far from over. New witnesses continue to come forward, new documents continue to be declassified, and new technologies continue to provide us with tools for analyzing the evidence that has been collected over the decades. But perhaps the most important development in the Roswell case isn't the emergence of new evidence. It's the changing attitude of government and military officials toward the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation. In recent years, Pentagon officials have acknowledged that they have observed phenomena that they cannot explain. Intelligence agencies have released videos showing objects that appear to exhibit impossible flight characteristics. These admissions don't prove that the Roswell incident involved extraterrestrial technology, but they do suggest that the government is becoming more open to the possibility that we are being visited by beings from other worlds, and that openness might eventually lead to the revelation of what really happened in that desert more than 70 years ago. The truth about Roswell might be more extraordinary than even the most dedicated researchers have imagined. It might involve not just one crash, but multiple incidents. Not just one type of extraterrestrial visitor, but several different civilizations. Not just a simple cover-up, but a complex ongoing relationship between human governments and extraterrestrial intelligences. Or the truth might be more mundane than the believers want to admit. The debris might have been from an experimental aircraft or a classified military program. The witnesses might have been confused or mistaken about what they saw. The cover-up might have been necessary to protect legitimate national security interests, rather than to hide evidence of extraterrestrial contact. But regardless of what the truth turns out to be, the Roswell incident has already changed the world. It has inspired generations of scientists and researchers to search for evidence of extraterrestrial life. It has challenged our assumptions about what's possible and what's real, and it has reminded us that there are still mysteries in the universe that we don't understand. As we drift off to sleep tonight, we can look up at the stars and wonder what other secrets might be hidden in the darkness. We can imagine what it would mean if we really aren't alone in the universe, and we can appreciate the profound mystery of what happened in a small desert town in New Mexico on a summer night more than 70 years ago. The story of Roswell is ultimately a story about the search for truth in a world full of secrets. It's about the courage of witnesses who risked everything to tell their stories. It's about the dedication of researchers who have spent decades trying to uncover the facts. And it's about the possibility that the most important discovery in human history might already have been made, but kept hidden from the very people who deserve to know about it. Whether you believe that what crashed in the desert outside Roswell was an extraterrestrial spacecraft or simply an experimental military aircraft, the incident serves as a reminder that there are still profound mysteries in our world. There are still questions that haven't been answered and secrets that haven't been revealed. And perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps the mystery of Roswell is more important than the truth. Perhaps the questions it raises are more valuable than the answers it might provide. Because in the end, the story of Roswell isn't just about what happened in 1947. It's about what might be possible in the future. It's about our place in the universe and our relationship with the unknown. As the decades pass and new evidence emerges, we may eventually learn the full truth about what happened at Roswell. But until that day comes, the incident will remain one of the most compelling mysteries of our time. A reminder that the universe is full of wonders that we're only beginning to understand, and that the greatest discoveries might be the ones that are still waiting to be made. The desert outside Roswell is quiet now, much as it was before that fateful summer night in 1947. The wind still blows through the sagebrush. The stars still shine in the vast New Mexico sky. And somewhere in the darkness, the truth about what happened there continues to wait for the right moment to reveal itself. But even in the silence, the questions remain. Questions about what we are, where we come from, and whether we're truly alone in the vast expanse of space. Questions that the incident at Roswell brought into sharp focus, and that continue to challenge our understanding of reality itself. And as we close our eyes and let sleep take us, we can carry those questions with us into our dreams. Dreams of distant worlds and impossible technologies. Dreams of first contact and cosmic revelations. Dreams of a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we ever dared to imagine. The story of Roswell may have begun with a crash in the desert, but it continues in the minds and hearts of everyone who looks up at the night sky and wonders what might be looking back. And in that wonder, in that endless curiosity about the unknown, we find perhaps the most important truth of all, that the universe is full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, and that the greatest adventure in human history might still be ahead of us. Tonight, let me take you deeper into the shadows of what really happened after that initial crash. Because while the world was focused on the weather balloon explanation, something far more extraordinary was unfolding behind closed doors. You see, the debris field that Mac Brazel discovered wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning, and what happened next would involve some of the most classified operations in American military history. Within hours of Major Marcel's initial assessment, secure phone lines were buzzing between Roswell and the highest levels of command. This wasn't just another crashed aircraft investigation. According to multiple sources, teams of specialists were being assembled from across the country. Metallurgists, physicists, intelligence officers, and personnel from programs so classified that their existence wouldn't be acknowledged for decades. But here's what makes this even more intriguing. The military response wasn't just about recovering debris. According to witness testimonies that have emerged over the years, there were multiple sites involved in the Roswell incident. The debris field was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. About 30 miles from where Mac Brazel made his discovery, another team was reportedly dealing with something far more intact and far more disturbing. The witness who first brought this to light was a rancher named Barney Barnett. For decades, Barnett's story was dismissed as second-hand testimony, but recent research has uncovered documentation that places him in exactly the right location at exactly the right time. According to Barnett's account, he was conducting a geological survey when he came across what appeared to be a crashed aircraft unlike anything he'd ever seen. The object was disc-shaped, metallic, and partially embedded in the ground. But it was what he found near the craft that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Barnett described seeing several small beings scattered around the crash site. They were humanoid in appearance, but clearly not human. Small in stature, with disproportionately large heads and what he described as grey, almost translucent skin. They appeared to be deceased, possibly killed in the crash. Before Barnett could examine the scene more closely, he was approached by a group of archaeologists who had apparently stumbled upon the same site. But their investigation was cut short when military personnel arrived and immediately cordoned off the area. According to multiple witnesses, everyone present was sworn to secrecy under threat of prosecution. The archaeologists were escorted away, and Barnett was told that discussing what he had seen would be considered a matter of national security. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. But here's what makes Barnett's account so compelling. The details he provided in the 1940s match remarkably well with descriptions of extraterrestrial beings that wouldn't become part of popular culture until decades later. Remember, this was 1947. The classic grey alien image that we're all familiar with today didn't exist in popular consciousness. Science fiction movies of the era depicted aliens as either humanoid beings in silver suits or monstrous creatures with tentacles. The small grey beings with large heads and eyes that Barnett described wouldn't become a cultural archetype until the 1960s and 70s. So either Barnett was remarkably prescient about how future science fiction would depict aliens, or he was describing something he actually witnessed. But Barnett's testimony is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Over the years, dozens of other witnesses have come forward with similar accounts. Military personnel who claimed to have been involved in the recovery operation. Civilians who reported seeing unusual activity in the desert. And most disturbingly, individuals who claimed to have been present during the examination of the recovered materials and beings. One of the most detailed accounts comes from a man who identified himself only as J.R., a former military intelligence officer who claimed to have been present during the initial recovery operation. According to J.R., the crash site was unlike anything in military experience. The craft itself was described as being constructed from a single piece of material, with no visible seams, bolts, or joints. It was as if the entire vehicle had been grown rather than assembled. The surface was smooth and metallic, but it didn't reflect light in the way that conventional metals do. More remarkably, J.R. claimed that the craft showed no signs of having an engine, fuel system, or any other recognizable propulsion mechanism. There were no wings, no propellers, no jet intakes. Yet witnesses reported that similar objects had been seen flying at impossible speeds and making impossible maneuvers. The implications of this are staggering. If J.R.'s account is accurate, then the craft represented a form of technology that operated on principles completely unknown to human science. It suggested a level of engineering sophistication that was centuries, if not millennia, ahead of anything humans had achieved. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of J.R.'s testimony wasn't what he said about the craft itself. It was what he claimed to have witnessed during the examination of the beings found at the crash site. According to J.R., the beings were taken to a secure facility where they were examined by a team of medical professionals. The examination was conducted under the strictest security protocols, with everyone present sworn to absolute secrecy. The beings, J.R. claimed, were unlike anything in human anatomy. They were humanoid in basic structure, but their proportions were completely different from humans. Their heads were much larger relative to their body size, and their eyes were enormous and completely black. They had no visible ears, and their mouths were little more than slits. Most remarkably, the beings appeared to have no reproductive organs and no digestive system, as we would understand it. Their internal anatomy was completely different from human biology, suggesting that they had evolved under completely different conditions. The medical team conducting the examination was reportedly baffled by what they found. The being's skin was described as being extremely thin and almost translucent. Their bones were hollow, like those of birds, but much more delicate, and their brain structure was completely unlike anything in terrestrial biology. But here's where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. According to JR, one of the beings was still alive when it was recovered from the crash site. The surviving being was reportedly conscious and aware, but unable to communicate through conventional means. It made no sounds and showed no signs of distress, despite having been injured in the crash. The medical team was at a loss for how to treat injuries to an anatomy they didn't understand. JR claimed that the being survived for several days before succumbing to its injuries. During that time, it was observed constantly by military personnel and medical staff. Some witnesses reported that the being seemed to be trying to communicate, but not through speech or gesture. Instead, they described a sense of thoughts or emotions being projected directly into their minds. This aspect of the story is particularly difficult to verify, and it's where even some UFO researchers become skeptical. The idea of telepathic communication with extraterrestrial beings ventures into territory that's more science fiction than science fact. But consider this. If an extraterrestrial civilization was advanced enough to develop interstellar travel, would it be so unreasonable to assume that they had also developed advanced forms of communication? Our own technology is moving in the direction of brain-computer interfaces and thought-controlled devices. A civilization that was centuries ahead of us might have developed direct mind-to-mind communication. The implications of JR's testimony, if accurate, are profound. It suggests that the Roswell incident wasn't just a crash recovery operation. It was humanity's first documented contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence. But it also raises troubling questions about what happened to that intelligence. If the being was indeed alive and trying to communicate, did the military make any attempt to establish meaningful contact? Did they try to learn about the being's origins, its purpose on Earth, or the civilization it represented? According to JR, the priority was containment and study, not communication. The being was treated as a specimen to be examined, rather than as a representative of another civilization. This approach, while understandable from a military perspective, might have resulted in the loss of the greatest opportunity for advancement in human history. But JR's account raises another disturbing possibility. If one being survived the crash, it's possible that others did too. And if the military's first instinct was to contain and study rather than communicate, what happened to any other survivors? This question becomes even more troubling when you consider the testimony of other witnesses who claim to have seen multiple crash sites in the Roswell area. If there were indeed several incidents, it's possible that the military recovered not just one or two beings, but several. The fate of these beings, if they existed, remains one of the darkest aspects of the Roswell mystery. Were they treated as prisoners of war? Were they subjected to medical experiments? Were they simply allowed to die in military custody? These questions can't be answered based on the available evidence, but they highlight the moral and ethical complexities that would arise from any genuine contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. How do you treat beings that are clearly intelligent but completely alien to human experience? The military's response to the Roswell incident, if the witness testimonies are accurate, suggests that they viewed the situation primarily through the lens of national security and scientific opportunity. The beings were seen as potential threats to be contained and sources of advanced technology to be exploited. This approach, while perhaps understandable given the context of the times, might have set a precedent for how our government would handle any future contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. Rather than approaching such contact as an opportunity for peaceful interaction and mutual understanding, the default response might be one of suspicion and exploitation. But the story of what happened to the beings allegedly recovered at Roswell doesn't end with their examination and death. According to some witnesses, the bodies were preserved and transported to various military installations for further study. One of the most specific claims comes from a former military photographer who identified himself as Frederick Benthal. According to Benthal, he was flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio just days after the Roswell incident to photograph the recovered materials and beings. Benthal's account is particularly detailed and disturbing. He described being taken to a heavily guarded hangar where he was shown the bodies of 4 extraterrestrial beings. The beings were laid out on examination tables, and Benthal was instructed to photograph them from every angle. According to Benthal, the beings were in various states of decomposition, suggesting that they had been dead for several days. But even in death, their alien nature was unmistakable. They were clearly not human, and they were clearly not from Earth. Benthal claimed that he was told the photographs would be used for scientific study, and that they were classified at the highest levels of government. He was sworn to secrecy, and told that revealing what he had seen would constitute treason. For decades, Benthal honored that oath of secrecy, but in the 1990s, as he approached the end of his life, he began to speak publicly about what he had witnessed. His testimony, combined with that of other witnesses, suggests that the study of the Roswell beings continued for years after the initial incident. But here's where the story becomes even more complex. Because if the military was indeed studying extraterrestrial beings and technology, the implications go far beyond just the Roswell incident. Consider the rapid pace of technological development that occurred in the decades following 1947. The development of transistors, integrated circuits, fiber optics, and countless other technologies that formed the foundation of the modern world. Was this simply the natural progression of human innovation, or did we have help from technologies that weren't originally developed on Earth? Some researchers have suggested that the technology recovered at Roswell was gradually reverse-engineered and fed into human development programs. This would explain why so many revolutionary technologies emerged from military research programs in the decades following the incident. The transistor, for example, was developed at Bell Labs just a few months after the Roswell incident. The researchers who developed it claimed that it was the result of years of research into semiconductor physics. But some have questioned whether they might have had access to examples of advanced electronics that demonstrated principles they were trying to understand. Similarly, the development of integrated circuits in the 1950s represented a quantum leap in electronics technology. The idea of etching complex circuits onto silicon wafers was revolutionary, but it was also remarkably similar to the descriptions of technology that witnesses claimed to have seen in the Roswell debris. The development of fiber optic technology in the 1960s is another example. The idea of transmitting information through light pulses in glass fibers was completely novel, but it was also consistent with some of the materials that Roswell witnesses described. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of these technologies were directly copied from extraterrestrial sources. The human scientists and engineers who developed them were brilliant individuals who deserved credit for their innovations. But it's possible that exposure to examples of advanced technology provided inspiration or confirmation for ideas that were already being explored. This kind of technological inspiration wouldn't necessarily require direct reverse engineering. Sometimes, simply knowing that something is possible is enough to guide research in productive directions. If human scientists had access to examples of advanced electronics, materials science, or propulsion systems, it might have accelerated development in those areas by decades. But the implications of this possibility are staggering. If human technological development was indeed influenced by extraterrestrial technology, then our entire modern civilization might be built on a foundation of borrowed knowledge. Everything from computers to communication systems to medical devices might incorporate principles that were originally developed by another civilization. This raises profound questions about human achievement and independence. Are we truly the masters of our own technological destiny, or are we following a path that was laid out for us by beings from another world? The answer to this question might be found in the classified archives of government agencies and military contractors. Documents that detail the true origins of key technologies and the sources of inspiration for breakthrough innovations. But accessing these documents would require a level of government transparency that has never existed when it comes to UFO-related materials. The same secrecy that has surrounded the Roswell incident for more than 70 years continues to protect whatever truth lies behind the rapid technological advancement of the late 20th century. However, there are hints that this secrecy might be beginning to crack. In recent years, government officials have acknowledged that they have been studying unidentified aerial phenomena for decades. They have released videos showing objects that appear to exhibit impossible flight characteristics, and they have admitted that they don't understand the technology behind these phenomena. These admissions don't prove that the government has been reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology, but they do suggest that the official position on UFOs is becoming more nuanced and more open to possibilities that were once dismissed as fantasy. The question is whether this new openness will eventually lead to revelations about what really happened at Roswell and what role extraterrestrial technology might have played in human development. The answer to that question might determine whether we ever learn the full truth about our place in the universe and our relationship with other intelligent civilizations. But even if the full truth about Roswell is never revealed, the incident has already had a profound impact on human consciousness. It has forced us to confront the possibility that we are not alone in the universe. It has challenged our assumptions about what's possible and what's real, and it has inspired generations of scientists, researchers, and dreamers to search for evidence of extraterrestrial life. In many ways, the mystery of Roswell is more important than the truth. It represents humanity's willingness to consider possibilities that challenge our understanding of reality. It reflects our deep desire to know whether we are alone in the universe and our curiosity about what other forms of intelligence might exist. As we continue to explore space and search for signs of extraterrestrial life, the lessons of Roswell remain relevant. They remind us that the truth might be stranger than we imagine, that our governments might be keeping secrets that affect our understanding of reality, and that the greatest discoveries might be the ones that are still waiting to be made. The story of Roswell is ultimately a story about the search for truth in a world full of mysteries. It's about the courage to ask difficult questions and the persistence to keep searching for answers, even when those answers seem impossible to find. And as we drift off to sleep tonight, we can carry that search with us into our dreams. Dreams of distant worlds and impossible technologies. Dreams of first contact and cosmic revelations. Dreams of a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we ever dared to imagine. The desert outside Roswell is quiet now, but the questions it raised continue to echo through our collective consciousness. Questions about what we are, where we come from, and whether we're truly alone in the vast expanse of space. And in those questions, in that endless curiosity about the unknown, we find perhaps the most important truth of all, that the universe is full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, and that the greatest adventure in human history might still be ahead of us. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the darkness above, the stars are waiting to reveal their secrets. And perhaps, just perhaps, we're not as alone as we think we are. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the alleged Roswell cover-up isn't what the government has told us. It's what they've done to the people who dared to speak the truth. Consider the fate of Mac Brazel, the rancher who first discovered the debris. After his initial report to the sheriff, Mac was taken into military custody for what officials described as debriefing. But according to his family members, Mac was held for nearly a week, subjected to intense questioning, and emerged from the experience a changed man. Bill Brazel, Mac's son, later described how his father returned from that military interrogation. Gone was the curious, talkative man who had excitedly shared his discovery with neighbors. In his place was someone who seemed genuinely frightened, someone who refused to discuss what had happened, and who warned his family never to speak about the incident again. But here's what makes Mac's story even more disturbing. According to multiple witnesses, Mac didn't just return home with a new attitude about secrecy. He returned with things that a simple rancher working marginal land shouldn't have been able to afford. Neighbors reported that Mac suddenly had money for improvements to his property. He purchased new equipment, made repairs that had been put off for years, and even bought a new truck. For a man who had struggled financially his entire life, this sudden prosperity was remarkable. The implication is clear. Mac Brazel was paid for his silence. But the price of that payment might have been more than just money. It might have been his peace of mind, his relationship with his family, and his sense of integrity. Similar patterns of intimidation and compensation have been reported by other Roswell witnesses. Military personnel who were present during the recovery operation have described being threatened with court-martial if they spoke about what they had seen. Some reported being transferred to distant assignments immediately after the incident, effectively removing them from the area where they might be tempted to talk. Civilians who claimed to have witnessed unusual activity were reportedly visited by men in military uniforms who made it clear that discussing their observations would not be in their best interests. Some witnesses described these visits as polite but firm warnings. Others characterized them as outright threats. Glenn Dennis, the mortician who claimed to have received those mysterious phone calls about embalming procedures, reported one of the most disturbing intimidation encounters. According to Dennis, he was confronted by military personnel who made it explicitly clear that his life and the lives of his family members depended on his silence. Dennis described being taken to a secure area of the military base, where he was shown what appeared to be biological specimens, unlike anything in human anatomy. But before he could examine them closely, he was forcibly removed by military police and subjected to what he described as the most frightening experience of his life. The officers who confronted Dennis allegedly told him that the desert around Roswell was vast and that people could disappear without a trace. They warned him that any attempt to discuss what he had seen would result in consequences that would extend to his family members. For decades, Dennis honored that threat, speaking about the incident only in the most general terms. It wasn't until the 1990s, when other witnesses began coming forward, that he felt safe enough to provide detailed testimony about what he had experienced. But Dennis's story raises a troubling question. If the Roswell incident was really just a weather balloon recovery operation, why would the military resort to such extreme measures to silence witnesses? Why would they threaten a civilian mortician who had simply answered a phone call about embalming procedures? The answer might be that the military's response was proportional to the significance of what had actually been discovered. If they were dealing with evidence of extraterrestrial technology and beings, then any breach of security would have been seen as a threat to national security of the highest order. But the pattern of intimidation extended beyond just the immediate witnesses. Researchers who have investigated the Roswell incident over the years have reported their own encounters with individuals who seemed determined to discourage their work. Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist who first brought Major Jesse Marcel's testimony to public attention, reported numerous instances of harassment and intimidation, phone calls in the middle of the night, mysterious break-ins at his home, and encounters with individuals who seemed to know far more about his research than they should have. Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt, the researchers who conducted the most comprehensive investigation of the Roswell incident, reported similar experiences. They described being followed, having their phones tapped, and receiving warnings to cease their research activities. These reports might sound paranoid, but they're consistent with documented government programs for monitoring and disrupting civilian research into classified topics. The FBI's COINTELPRO program, which was active during the Cold War era, specifically targeted individuals and organizations that were deemed threats to national security. If the government was indeed hiding evidence of extraterrestrial contact, it would make sense that they would monitor and potentially harass researchers who were getting too close to the truth. The stakes would be too high to allow civilian investigators to uncover classified information. But the intimidation tactics allegedly used against Roswell witnesses and researchers might have had an unintended consequence. Rather than discouraging interest in the incident, they might have actually validated the claims of those who believed something extraordinary had happened. After all, if the Roswell incident was really just a case of mistaken identity involving a weather balloon, why would the government go to such lengths to silence witnesses and discourage research. The extreme nature of the alleged cover-up activities suggests that there was something far more significant at stake than just embarrassment over a misidentified piece of military equipment. This pattern of secrecy and intimidation has continued well into the modern era. Witnesses who have come forward with new testimony about the Roswell incident have reported being contacted by government agents who advised them to reconsider their decision to speak publicly. Some have described receiving visits from individuals who identified themselves as being from various government agencies, but who refused to provide official identification. These visitors allegedly warned the witnesses that their credibility would be destroyed if they continued to make claims about extraterrestrial contact. Other witnesses have reported more subtle forms of pressure, professional consequences for those in government or military positions who have spoken out about UFO-related experiences, social ostracism for civilians who have shared their stories, and character assassination through media campaigns designed to discredit their testimony. The message is clear. Discussing UFO encounters, particularly those involving physical evidence or contact with extraterrestrial beings, comes with significant personal and professional risks. This creates a climate of fear that discourages witnesses from coming forward and makes it difficult for researchers to gather comprehensive testimony. But despite these risks, witnesses continue to come forward. As they approach the end of their lives, many seem to feel a moral obligation to share what they experienced, regardless of the potential consequences. This is particularly true of military personnel who were present during the Roswell recovery operation. Several former servicemen have provided detailed testimony about what they witnessed, often waiting until after their retirement to speak publicly. Their accounts are remarkably consistent, despite being provided independently and often decades apart. They describe materials that exhibited impossible properties, beings that were clearly not human, and a level of military secrecy that was unprecedented in their experience. Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who first examined the debris, eventually broke his silence in the 1970s. His testimony was the catalyst for renewed interest in the Roswell incident and inspired other witnesses to come forward with their own accounts. Marcel's decision to speak publicly came at significant personal cost. He was ridiculed by skeptics, questioned by government officials, and subjected to character assassination by those who wanted to discredit his testimony. But he maintained until his death that what he had recovered from the ranch was not from any earthly source. Marcel's son, Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr., has continued his father's legacy of truth-telling. As a young boy, he was shown pieces of the debris by his father and has provided detailed descriptions of the materials and their unusual properties. Dr. Marcel's testimony is particularly valuable because it comes from someone who actually handled the materials as a child before he could have been influenced by later UFO mythology or popular culture depictions of alien technology. According to Dr. Marcel, the materials his father showed him that night in 1947 were unlike anything in human technology. They were impossibly light, yet incredibly strong, and they bore symbols that looked like nothing in any earthly writing system. Most remarkably, Dr. Marcel has maintained his testimony for decades, even as he pursued a successful career in medicine and built a reputation that could have been damaged by association with UFO claims. His willingness to stake his professional credibility on his childhood memories speaks to the profound impact of what he witnessed. But the Marcel family's testimony is just one thread in a tapestry of witness accounts that spans decades. Each new witness who comes forward adds another piece to the puzzle of what really happened at Roswell. Some have provided testimony about the recovery operation itself, describing the massive military response that was mobilized to secure the crash sites. Others have spoken about the analysis of the recovered materials, claiming to have been involved in efforts to understand the technology and reverse engineer its capabilities. A few have provided the most disturbing testimony of all, accounts of direct contact with living extraterrestrial beings who survived the crash and were held in military custody. These accounts are the most difficult to verify and the most controversial within the UFO research community. They involve claims that go far beyond simple crash recovery and material analysis. They suggest that the Roswell incident was not just humanity's first recovery of extraterrestrial technology, but our first opportunity for direct communication with beings from another world. If these accounts are accurate, they raise profound questions about what was learned from these encounters. Did the beings provide information about their origins, their technology, or their purposes on Earth? Were they able to communicate effectively with their human captors? And what ultimately happened to them? The answers to these questions, if they exist, remain locked away in the most classified archives of the American government. They are protected by security classifications that may never be lifted and by institutional secrecy that has survived for more than 70 years. But the very existence of such extreme secrecy suggests that something of enormous significance was discovered at Roswell. Weather balloons don't require 70 years of classification. Experimental aircraft don't necessitate the intimidation of civilian witnesses. And misidentified debris doesn't inspire the creation of entirely new categories of classified information. The scope and duration of the Roswell cover-up, if it exists, suggests that what was recovered in the desert of New Mexico was nothing less than proof that we are not alone in the universe. And that proof, for reasons that we can only speculate about, has been deemed too dangerous for the public to know. But as we move further into the 21st century, the sustainability of such a massive secret becomes increasingly questionable. The original witnesses are aging and dying, taking their first-hand knowledge with them. The classified documents are deteriorating in storage, and the technology that was once impossibly advanced is being approached by human innovation. Perhaps most importantly, our understanding of the universe has evolved to the point where the existence of extraterrestrial life is not just possible, but probable. We have discovered thousands of planets orbiting other stars, many of which appear to be capable of supporting life. We have found evidence of water and organic compounds throughout the solar system, and we have begun to understand the conditions that might give rise to intelligence elsewhere in the universe. In this context, the revelation that we have been visited by extraterrestrial beings would be shocking, but not incomprehensible. It would answer questions that we have been asking for centuries and provide confirmation of theories that scientists have been developing for decades. The question is no longer whether extraterrestrial life exists, but whether it has already made contact with Earth. And the answer to that question might be hidden in the classified files of the Roswell incident, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. As we drift deeper into this desert night, surrounded by the vast silence of New Mexico, we can almost feel the weight of those secrets pressing down on us. Somewhere in the darkness above, the stars shine with the light of distant suns, perhaps warming worlds where other forms of intelligence have evolved and thrived. And somewhere in the classified vaults of government agencies, the truth about what happened at Roswell continues to wait. Wait for the courage to reveal it. Wait for the wisdom to understand it. Wait for the moment when humanity is ready to learn that we are not alone in the universe. The story of Roswell is far from over. New witnesses continue to emerge. New documents continue to be declassified. And new technologies continue to provide us with tools for understanding the evidence that has been collected over the decades. But perhaps the most important development in the Roswell case is not the emergence of new evidence. It is the gradual shift in public consciousness toward acceptance of the possibility that we are being visited by beings from other worlds. The stigma that once surrounded UFO research is beginning to fade. Government officials are becoming more open about their investigations into unidentified aerial phenomena, and scientists are beginning to take seriously the possibility that some of these phenomena might represent evidence of extraterrestrial technology. This shift in attitude creates an environment where the truth about Roswell might finally be revealed, not because new evidence has been discovered, but because we are finally ready to accept the implications of the evidence that has been available all along. The desert outside Roswell holds its secrets close, but the whispers of truth are growing louder. In the testimonies of aging witnesses, in the analyses of recovered materials, in the patterns of government secrecy that have persisted for decades, we can begin to glimpse the outline of something extraordinary, something that challenges our understanding of physics, our assumptions about biology, and our place in the cosmic order. Something that suggests we are part of a universe far more complex and populated than we ever dared to imagine. And as we close our eyes and let the mystery of Roswell carry us into sleep, we can dream of the day when the full truth is finally revealed. When the last classified document is released, the final witness testimony is recorded, and the greatest secret in human history is finally shared with the world. Until that day comes, we can take comfort in the knowledge that the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered, and that the greatest adventure in human history, the confirmation that we are not alone in the universe, might be just one revelation away. The stars above Roswell shine with the same light that has guided humanity throughout its history. They have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of worlds, and perhaps the first tentative steps toward contact between intelligent species separated by vast distances of space and time. And in their silent vigil, they remind us that the universe is full of wonders we have yet to discover, mysteries we have yet to solve, and truths we have yet to uncover. The story of Roswell is just the beginning of a much larger story, the story of humanity's place in a cosmos that is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the darkness above, the answers to our deepest questions are waiting to be found, and perhaps, just perhaps, they are closer than we think. The truth about Roswell may never be fully revealed in our lifetimes, but perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps the real power of this story lies not in the answers it provides, but in the questions it forces us to ask. Questions about the nature of reality itself, about whether the universe we think we know is actually far stranger and more populated than we ever imagined, about whether our governments have been keeping secrets that could fundamentally change our understanding of our place in the cosmos, and most importantly, questions about what it means to be human in a universe that might be teeming with other forms of intelligence. You see, the Roswell incident has become more than just a historical mystery. It has become a mirror that reflects our deepest hopes and fears about contact with the unknown. It represents our desire to know that we're not alone in the universe, balanced against our fear of what that knowledge might mean for our future. The witnesses who have come forward over the decades have done so at great personal cost. They have risked their reputations, their careers, and in some cases their safety to share what they believe to be the truth. Whether you believe their accounts or not, their courage in speaking out deserves respect. Major Jesse Marcel spent the last years of his life trying to set the record straight about what he had witnessed. Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. has dedicated decades to preserving his father's legacy and sharing his own memories of that extraordinary night. Glenn Dennis endured years of ridicule and harassment for daring to speak about his experiences. These are not the actions of people seeking fame or fortune. These are the actions of individuals who felt compelled by conscience to share what they believed to be one of the most important events in human history. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of Roswell. Not whether aliens crashed in the desert, but whether we have the courage to seek truth, even when that truth challenges everything we thought we knew about reality. The desert outside Roswell continues to hold its secrets. The wind still blows through the sagebrush. The stars still shine in the vast New Mexico sky. And somewhere in the silence, the echo of that summer night in 1947 continues to reverberate through our collective consciousness. But the story doesn't end in the desert. It continues in the minds and hearts of everyone who looks up at the night sky and wonders what might be looking back. It lives on in the scientists who search for signs of extraterrestrial life, in the researchers who continue to investigate unexplained phenomena, and in the dreamers who refuse to accept that we are alone in the universe. The legacy of Roswell is not just about what happened in the past. It's about what might happen in the future. It's about the possibility that we are on the verge of discoveries that will fundamentally change our understanding of reality itself. Recent developments in astronomy have shown us that the universe is far more complex and potentially habitable than we ever imagined. We have discovered thousands of exoplanets, many of which orbit in the habitable zones of their stars. We have found evidence of water and organic compounds throughout our solar system, and we have begun to understand the conditions that might give rise to life elsewhere in the universe. At the same time, government agencies have begun to acknowledge that they have been investigating unidentified aerial phenomena for decades. They have released videos and reports that document objects exhibiting flight characteristics that appear to defy our understanding of physics. And they have admitted that they don't understand the technology behind these phenomena. This convergence of scientific discovery and government acknowledgement creates a unique moment in human history. We are closer than ever to answering the fundamental question of whether we are alone in the universe. And the answer to that question might be found not in distant stars, but in the classified files of events that happened right here on Earth. The Roswell incident, whether it involved extraterrestrial contact or not, has prepared us for this moment. It has forced us to confront the possibility that reality is far stranger than we imagined. It has challenged us to question official narratives and seek truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable or threatening to established power structures. Most importantly, it has reminded us that the universe is full of mysteries waiting to be solved, that the greatest discoveries often come from the most unlikely places, and that the truth, no matter how extraordinary, has a way of eventually revealing itself. As we drift off to sleep in this quiet desert night, we can carry with us the knowledge that we live in a universe of infinite possibility, a universe where the impossible might be possible, where the unknown might become known, and where the greatest adventure in human history might still be ahead of us. The story of Roswell is ultimately a story about hope. Hope that we are not alone in the vast emptiness of space. Hope that there are other forms of intelligence out there, perhaps watching over us, perhaps waiting for us to mature enough to join them in the cosmic community. And hope that someday, perhaps sooner than we think, we will finally learn the truth about what happened in the desert outside Roswell on that summer night in 1947. The truth about whether we received our first visitors from another world. The truth about whether our government has been keeping the greatest secret in human history. Until that day comes, we can take comfort in the mystery itself, in the questions that keep us searching, the possibilities that keep us dreaming, and the hope that keeps us looking up at the stars with wonder and anticipation. The desert is quiet now, but the questions remain. Questions that echo through the darkness, carried on the wind like whispers from another world. Questions that remind us that the universe is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, truths waiting to be revealed, and wonders waiting to be explored. And as we close our eyes and let the gentle rhythm of the desert night carry us into peaceful sleep, we can dream of the day when those secrets are finally revealed, when the truth about Roswell is finally known, when the greatest mystery of our time is finally solved. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers. The stars are watching over us tonight, just as they have for countless generations before us. And perhaps, somewhere among those distant lights, someone is watching back, waiting for the moment when we are ready to learn that we are not alone in the universe. The story of Roswell may have begun with a crash in the desert, but it continues in the dreams and aspirations of everyone who believes that the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered, and that truth, whatever it may be, is worth seeking. Rest now, knowing that the mystery endures, the questions persist, and the possibility of discovery remains alive in the infinite darkness above. The universe is vast, full of wonders we have yet to imagine, and the greatest adventure in human history may still be ahead of us. The truth about Roswell may never be fully revealed in our lifetimes. But perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps the real power of this story lies not in the answers it provides, but in the questions it forces us to ask. Questions about the nature of reality itself, about whether the universe we think we know is actually far stranger and more populated than we ever imagined, about whether our governments have been keeping secrets that could fundamentally change our understanding of our place in the cosmos, and most importantly, questions about what it means to be human in a universe that might be teeming with other forms of intelligence. You see, the Roswell incident has become more than just a historical mystery. It has become a mirror that reflects our deepest hopes and fears about contact with the unknown. It represents our desire to know that we're not alone in the universe, balanced against our fear of what that knowledge might mean for our future. The witnesses who have come forward over the decades have done so at great personal cost. They have risked their reputations, their careers, and in some cases their safety to share what they believe to be the truth. Whether you believe their accounts or not, their courage in speaking out deserves respect. Major Jesse Marcel spent the last years of his life trying to set the record straight about what he had witnessed. Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. has dedicated decades to preserving his father's legacy and sharing his own memories of that extraordinary night. Glenn Dennis endured years of ridicule and harassment for daring to speak about his experiences. These are not the actions of people seeking fame or fortune. These are the actions of individuals who felt compelled by conscience to share what they believed to be one of the most important events in human history. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of Roswell. Not whether aliens crashed in the desert, but whether we have the courage to seek truth, even when that truth challenges everything we thought we knew about reality. The desert outside Roswell continues to hold its secrets. The wind still blows through the sagebrush. The stars still shine in the vast New Mexico sky. And somewhere in the silence, the echo of that summer night in 1947 continues to reverberate through our collective consciousness. But the story doesn't end in the desert. It continues in the minds and hearts of everyone who looks up at the night sky and wonders what might be looking back. It lives on in the scientists who search for signs of extraterrestrial life, in the researchers who continue to investigate unexplained phenomena, and in the dreamers who refuse to accept that we are alone in the universe. The legacy of Roswell is not just about what happened in the past, it's about what might happen in the future. It's about the possibility that we are on the verge of discoveries that will fundamentally change our understanding of reality itself. Recent developments in astronomy have shown us that the universe is far more complex and potentially habitable than we ever imagined. We have discovered thousands of exoplanets, many of which orbit in the habitable zones of their stars. We have found evidence of water and organic compounds throughout our solar system, and we have begun to understand the conditions that might give rise to life elsewhere in the universe. At the same time, government agencies have begun to acknowledge that they have been investigating unidentified aerial phenomena for decades. They have released videos and reports that document objects exhibiting flight characteristics that appear to defy our understanding of physics, and they have admitted that they don't understand the technology behind these phenomena. This convergence of scientific discovery and government acknowledgement creates a unique moment in human history. We are closer than ever to answering the fundamental question of whether we are alone in the universe. And the answer to that question might be found not in distant stars, but in the classified files of events that happened right here on Earth. The Roswell incident, whether it involved extraterrestrial contact or not, has prepared us for this moment. It has forced us to confront the possibility that reality is far stranger than we imagined. It has challenged us to question official narratives and seek truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable or threatening to established power structures. Most importantly, it has reminded us that the universe is full of mysteries waiting to be solved, that the greatest discoveries often come from the most unlikely places, and that the truth, no matter how extraordinary, has a way of eventually revealing itself. As we drift off to sleep in this quiet desert night, we can carry with us the knowledge that we live in a universe of infinite possibility, a universe where the impossible might be possible, where the unknown might become known, and where the greatest adventure in human history might still be ahead of us. The story of Roswell is ultimately a story about hope. Hope that we are not alone in the vast emptiness of space. Hope that there are other forms of intelligence out there, perhaps watching over us, perhaps waiting for us to mature enough to join them in the cosmic community. And hope that someday, perhaps sooner than we think, we will finally learn the truth about what happened in the desert outside Roswell on that summer night in 1947. The truth about whether we received our first visitors from another world. The truth about whether our government has been keeping the greatest secret in human history. Until that day comes, we can take comfort in the mystery itself, in the questions that keep us searching, the possibilities that keep us dreaming, and the hope that keeps us looking up at the stars with wonder and anticipation. The desert is quiet now, but the questions remain. Questions that echo through the darkness, carried on the wind like whispers from another world. Questions that remind us that the universe is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, truths waiting to be revealed, and wonders waiting to be explored. And as we close our eyes and let the gentle rhythm of the desert night carry us into peaceful sleep, we can dream of the day when those secrets are finally revealed, when the truth about Roswell is finally known, when the greatest mystery of our time is finally solved. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers. The stars are watching over us tonight, just as they have for countless generations before us. And perhaps, somewhere among those distant lights, someone is watching back, waiting for the moment when we are ready to learn that we are not alone in the universe. The story of Roswell may have begun with a crash in the desert, but it continues in the dreams and aspirations of everyone who believes that the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered, and that truth, whatever it may be, is worth seeking. Rest now, knowing that the mystery endures, the questions persist, and the possibility of discovery remains alive in the infinite darkness above. The universe is vast, full of wonders we have yet to imagine, and the greatest adventure in human history may still be ahead of us.